South African builder Leopard Catamarans has developed a really strong reputation for its Powercats over the last couple of years. In 2020, its 53 won the Multi-Hull of the Year award. In 2022, its 46 won the Bob Awards. And in 2024, we've come down to Saint Raphael in the south of France to test out the latest and the smallest of that Powercat range. And that's this, the Leopard Powercat 40. Now, right from the start, it's quite clear that this is very much a Mediterranean boat. And you feel that when you sit down here at the lower helm. It's a single man helm. It's very deep set. Visibility is not great because you've got this central door here with pillars all around you. And also, it's relatively tight. I'm not a particularly big man, but I certainly wouldn't want to be any bigger if I wanted to slot myself in here. And also, it's worth noting that even though we have bow thrusters fitted to this particular boat, this is an owner's boat, there's no bow thruster control down here. So if you want to operate the bow thrusters in a marina, crab sideways, you're going to need to be up on that flybridge. So as I say, this feels very much like a boat built for the Mediterranean, where you'd expect to be helming up top whenever you take the boat out. But anyway, let's get her underway and see how she performs. Now, in spite of the fact that all the accommodation runs fore and aft inside these two hulls, we do have quite a stooping bridge deck that encompasses plenty of storage beneath these lockers on that foredeck there. So as we're running through these, I'm waiting to feel the impact of the underside of this boat on the wave shapes, but I'm not quite feeling it, I'm not getting it. We get a little bit of splash, a little bit of spray, but no impact. So it feels like this boat is actually very well balanced, like all the weight is in the right place and look like there's sufficient buoyancy forward to avoid that problem. And that's as it should be, because even though Leopard does make a range of sailing yachts, this, like its bigger sisters, the 53 and the 46, this was designed as a Powercat from the ground up. And you definitely feel that when you're driving it. Everything's very stable, everything's very well sorted, and also it's relatively refined. And at 6 knots, if you want to cruise long distance, really extend your range. We're only seeing about 56 decibels down here. And even at 20 knots, that doesn't exceed 70 decibels, so that's pretty good, I have to say. In terms of the handling, well, we'll throw around to starboard first, give her a bit of pace and heel her in. I say heel her in, of course it's a cat, it doesn't heel in at all. And round we go. No fireworks, relatively soft ride, everything's very obedient, very compliant. But what we really want to do is step away from this lower helm now and go up top to the primary helm and see how she is up there. Now this is very clearly much more like it. We've got plenty of space here for 3 people. I should think it's only designed for 2, but as I say, loads and loads of space for 3. Lots of space at the dash as well. We've got a couple of 12-inch MFDs here, one of them showing the aft view, but there's loads of space for bigger ones, or for 3 MFDs if you prefer. And here's our bow thruster, so that you can take more control when you're in a marina, and you've got a decent bit of windage on this boat obviously, so it's useful on a day like today. But visibility is much, much better. We do have a couple of these big stainless steel struts to hold up this big hardtop, but it's certainly a much better helm position than the one down below. So again, let's get her up to speed and have a little play. I've got these throttles synced, so I only have to use the one lever. We'll turn ourselves away from the wind and run with those seas first. Now we'll get her straight up to the top end and just test out the buoyancy of those hulls forward. As I say, you do get a few splashes down below. If I stand up, I can see a little bit of water ingress onto that foredeck, but certainly nothing reaches up here. We'll turn across them now. As we do so, we're pretty much running at maximum speed. These engines running right up to 3,800 RPM, and we're getting about 23 knots out of it today, which is pretty good. In all honesty, most people are going to want to cruise with this boat around about 8 to 14 knots, I would suggest. 10 to 12 is very good indeed, very refined, very quiet, relatively frugal, quite long range. And that's a useful thing, because with a 1400 litre fuel tank. That's not particularly big for a boat of this scale, so eking out the extra miles is useful, particularly as there's no option for an extended range fuel tank. Now we'll charge into these seas now, see how we go there. Again, the ride is very soft. In common with almost every wind deflector in the world, this wind deflector doesn't deflect a great deal of wind, but as I say, it's a Mediterranean boat, so at least that wind is relatively warm. And we'll swing her around to port this time. Good and hard. Treat it like a bit of a hooligan. And as you try that, it really doesn't let you do so. It gives you precisely what you would expect. Lots of stability, a good bit of softness, good bit of running efficiency, and if you drive it sensibly, a relatively quiet, secure and dry-ish ride. Now, I have dished out a little bit of criticism to that helm down below, and I think that's perfectly fair, but it's good to know that the Leopard designers have been thoughtful in terms of what they've done with this upper helm, because if you want a helm from up here when the weather is not so good, when it's a bit chilly or a bit wet, well, it's good to see that you've got runners built into this hardtop and little clips down below, so you can cordon this entire space off and use this as your permanent helm station all year round if you like. Now, this boat is not just 40 in name, it's also exactly 40 feet in length. And in spite of that relatively modest length, it still has a massive beam of 21'8". That's in excess of 54% of the overall length, and that's right up in sailing cat territory. But this is by no means a sailing cat. This is a powerboat designed and built from the ground up, as are the 46 and 53. That's at least in part what's led to those larger siblings winning their awards. And here you'll see that in terms of the shape and profile of the boat, well, it does look a bit squat and tubby, and you'd kind of expect that of a boat with those physical parameters. There's not a lot they can do about that. What's particularly interesting here, though, is in spite of the fact that we have a fine entry on these hulls, quite fine under the waterline as well, they expand quite a lot, so they're quite broad in fact, and they need to be because the accommodation is contained fore and aft in each of those. There's no accommodation beneath here, which begs the question, why have they dropped the bridge deck so significantly? Well, we'll see when we get onto the foredeck that that's all about storage, practicality, seamanship duties, and they've taken care of that side of things very well indeed. But we still get a decent bit of clearance beneath that bridge deck that goes all the way aft, and we certainly felt that when we were out in the chop earlier. Something else that's quite interesting is something I've already intimated during our sea trial earlier, and that's the fact that this is very much a Med style or even Caribbean style boat. And you can tell that because of the way they've organised the deck. Now, as you can see, we've got an enormous foredeck there in relation to the overall length. We've also got a very generous cockpit aft, a big flybridge up top, and the pilot house itself is relatively short given the overall length of this boat. So it'll be interesting to see what they've done with that space when we get there and take a closer look. But in the meantime, you'll see they've tried hard stylistically here too. We've got a nice big window line that dips aft just to try to take some of the weight and impact out of that profile. And when we reach the aft end, well, again, there's a couple of features that are very distinctive here. Now, the first of those is the fact we don't have a central platform that drops down for water sports and lifts up for med-style pontoons. What we actually have is a set of davits for your tender. So let's step on board and take a closer look, because so confident are Leopard in the scale of this aft cockpit that they've seen fit to move the aft bench, and that's a fixed bench, further forward, opening up a transverse walkway so you can attend to your tender, make your way from side to side, even when the main part of the cockpit is littered with freestanding furniture and guests. Let's make our way down into the engine spaces and take a look there. We'll start with the porthole. There's a good ladder to get yourself down into the space. And that space itself is pretty generous. You can see that this is a very broad hull at the aft end. If I bend down, there's the engine, the Yanmar 370. You can have a 320 or a 250. The owner spec'd a 370 on this boat for a bit of extra performance. Shaft driven, of course, and there's good access to that shaft. There's good access to the filters and fluids as well there. No problems there at all. There's the battery, the starter battery for your engine. We've got a generator here. There's the hydraulics for the rudder just beyond the ladder there. Here's the exhaust exiting, but loads of space for additional bits and bobs. Loads of space in particular for a water maker should you want one. But let's climb back out and head over to the starboard side. It's pretty much a mirror image. Again, lots of space. But as you'll see, when we pop round the corner, well, the basic layout is the same. We have no generator in here, so we've got a bit of extra space. We've got a bit of storage here, and we've got the hot water tank just there. While we're here, it's worth taking a look up at just how far back that flybridge comes, way beyond the level of that aft bench. Really expands the space up top, right back in fact to the davits for that tender. So shelter in here is tremendous. As you'd expect then, the table does not drop down into the gap. There's no option to turn this into a sunbed, because if you want to worship the sun, you either go up to the flybridge or forward to that foredeck, and we'll do that right now. And as we do so, it's worth noticing this. Now on a monohull, you might imagine that that would be a wet bar. It's not. We've just got a little storage space in here and a little workspace on top. If we move around to the back here, you'll see what it really is. It's basically a means of crowbarring some extra volume, some extra headroom and some better views into the starboard hull for the accommodation. And we'll take a look at that in a bit. But as I say, let's move forward to that foredeck and congratulate Leopard, frankly, on the nature of these side decks. Now, on a lot of Powercats that are adapted from sailing cats, you'll tend to see loads of space wasted on massive side decks that kind of limits the space in the saloon, but not so here. This makes loads of sense. You've got good grab rails on the right hand side, another good grab rail on the left, and it's entirely single level as you make your way to the foredeck. And when we reach the bow, well, this is where that stooping bridge deck that we spotted earlier pays serious dividends in terms of storage capacity. Now the anchor is located in the centre beneath that moulding. So if we lift this up, you'll see that you get good access to that. If we lift the one to the side of that, get the cushion out of the way and lift that hatch, well look, there's your anchor chain, plenty of room for that. But this to the side of it is absolutely vast, a huge drained locker, perfect for your fenders, bulky gear you don't mind getting wet. But that's not the most impressive storage space here by any means, because if we move further aft and look to the port side, oh, this is a dry locker, and this is absolutely vast. As things stand, it contains the canvases to help you close off that flybridge up top. But it's a tremendous space, it really is. You don't get the same on the starboard side because this walkway here that drops down, this is offset to starboard, and we'll see why when we go into the saloon. In the meantime though, let's close up these hatches and have a think about how you would actually use this foredeck, because on most boats you would tend to see a foredeck used for seating. Not so here though. If I close all these up and sort the cushions back out, I'll take a little seat to port and look across. Well, this is plainly a bit of a dream if you fancy a sunbathe. Great for lounging. As for seats, they're certainly less well taken care of. We come over here, we've got a little fold-up cushion, leans up against the screen there, and it's slightly angled to give you a bit of extra comfort. But it's relatively compromised, I would have to say. And so is the starboard one, particularly because when you lean that up, it directly blocks the view of the guy at the lower helm. So driving from the lower helm and sitting yourself up on the starboard side are not really going to work very well. That said, as I say, storage is a major strength. Space is a major strength up here as well. So sunbathing, and if we head aft and up onto the flybridge, you'll see that those keen on a bit of sun and a decent place to sit are pretty well catered for. And we access the flybridge on the port side, a few steps up and then spin around, and look at that, it's absolutely massive for a 40-footer. Really vast, huge, generous bench seat for 3 people at the helm there. There's nothing clever happens with this backrest because it doesn't need to. We already have the space for a big C-shaped dinette. Opposite that is a kind of chaise longue, very relaxed and very comfortable, and built into the back end of that is a fore and aft wet bar with a neat little sink and an electric griddle here, I think, at the aft end. There we are. And a fridge down below. Bit of extra space in here. You've got a bin in there, it's a drained locker. Presumably you could spec this with an ice maker or whatever else you fancied. And then behind all of this furniture, right at the very back end, we've got a big open space. You'll see that the hardtop stops above the wet bar, and that means that if you fancy a bit of a sunbathe on a freestanding lounger or a deck chair, this is the place to do it. Really broad. Feels nice and secure though with this wraparound rail. Storage is pretty well taken care of up here too. Most of these seats conceal little storage boxes. On this particular boat, they're not drained, and they probably need to be, as you can tell from that one. The same here on the forward part of that dinette. But capacity for storage is certainly very good, and there's absolutely no arguing with the scale of this. There's a flybridge on a 40-footer. But of course, wonderful though all these external day spaces might be, the place on this boat that takes the brunt of the compromise for that is the pilot house, or at least it certainly ought to. When you step inside, again, it's a single level deck with a simple threshold there. The scale actually feels pretty good. Really quite charming, and part of the reason for that is the fact that although it's relatively short fore and aft, it's particularly broad, so it feels almost square. And that in itself makes you feel very, very spacious indeed. It doesn't have the vibe of a tunnel at all like you sometimes get on a monohull. And it's arranged very simply. At the aft end, we have a good size of galley with high level storage, a cooker down below. And there we've got a little dishwasher with a retainer so it doesn't pop open at sea. Additional storage bits in there, and an electric hob on top, plus a sink here. And to the side of that, I quite like this. I've not seen this before on a boat. When I lift that up, a little drained section with a recessed tray for your draining board. That makes loads of sense. On the other side, well, there's a nice big American style Smeg fridge with a little ice machine there as well. Additional storage. And then we make our way forward, again single level, into the saloon space itself. Now, as you would expect of a cat, we've got a stairwell down to the porthole, and on the opposite side a stairwell down to the starboard hull. And forward of that, there's our seating. We've got a decent lounge seat, really comfy, that nice armchair behind the skipper's seat. Perhaps that's part of the reason why the skipper's seat is relatively tight, because they wanted to lavish proper space on this. And next to that, we've also got a little bit of storage in there and a couple of cup holders. They really work the space very hard all over this boat just to make the very most of what they have. And opposite that, we've got a neat little coffee table, again with storage and holders for your cups and your wine, and an L-shaped settee. If I move over to that L-shaped settee and take a seat, well, it looks directly across to the helm station. So in that regard, at least, the lower helm is the superior one, I have to say. More sociable than the one up top, certainly, because opposite the flybridge helm, we have the access point from the flybridge steps. But for me, one of the most attractive features of this saloon is to be found just to port of the helm station. It's this central door. Well, I call it a central door, as I intimated earlier. It's slightly offset to starboard, enabling you to make your way forward to the lounging spaces of that foredeck, kind of integrating the foredeck day spaces and the internal saloon spaces, just as designers try to do with the aft cockpit. It works very well, and there are two reasons why we can achieve this. Now, firstly, we've got the beam. That 21'8" beam, it's huge. So you've got decent side decks on both sides. You've got a decent size of helm too, and companion seating, but there's still space for this door here. And then, of course, there's the fact that all the accommodation is contained within the two hulls running fore and aft. There's no master cabin, spanning the gap between those holes forward, so there's no need for an access point. So that frees up this space to achieve exactly that, and I think that's a really worthwhile feature. But let's see how all of these design choices impact on the accommodation, and we'll start with the porthole, because this one is split into two. Now, this is very charter friendly, but of course Leopard catamarans do have a bit of a heritage in the charter market. As you'd expect, directly ahead of you is the day heads, a bathroom that's shared by the forward cabin and the aft cabin, and its length is very impressive. Headroom's pretty good too. If I step in there, that's got to be what, 6'3", 6'4", perhaps, maybe even a little more. There's a separate shower compartment, though you can't actually cordon it off with a door. It's more of a wet room arrangement. Nice big windows, lots of natural light, ventilation. There's the toilet aft with a sink and mirror in the centre. Plenty of space and sliding doors, of course, to make the very best use of this arrangement. Now, if we come out of there and look forward, well, here's a queen-size bed. A decent way forward too. So you see that even though we've got relatively fine entry from these holes, they do swell as they move up. So we've got good breadth. There's the big, long hole window we talked about that brightens things up a treat, plus a hatch, of course, up above. A bit of shelving there. Some good storage too behind the door. And if I spin myself back around, as I say, every space on this boat is used to the utmost. At the head end of the bed, you peer in there, we've got a lovely big storage space right up in the tapering V of the bow. And beneath this, we have access to your bow thruster. So that's very effective indeed. Very decent cabin. Now, of course, for the charter market, you'd expect this boat to be spec'd with 4 cabins, 2 forward in each hull, a central bathroom and another aft in each hull. We'll head to the aft bedroom in this porthole right now, because this actually is the one you would gravitate towards. For the most part, charter-ready boats tend to be spec'd with very similar cabins. Excuse me. And that forward cabin is very good, but the sheer brightness of these wraparound windows is fantastic. This is where the whole windows dip, so you get extra height, extra depth. Really fantastic light and views. And because it wraps around the back end there into the cockpit, you get another couple of windows looking aft. So the brightness of this space is really impressive. This, though, is not a charter boat. This is an owner's boat. So as you might anticipate, the starboard hull is very different. Instead of 2 cabins and a heads compartment, we step down into a fully open plan foyer with a television up here. Seems like a very odd place to mount a television until you realise it comes out on an extendable arm and swivels to face the bed, which, as in the porthole, has wraparound windows, nice and deep, nice and bright. There's even a bit of space on either side of this queen-size bed just to clamber in from the side instead of the end. If I climb onto the bed now, well, you'll see that as a 6-footer, even though we've got these mouldings up top, but there's loads of room for me to prop myself up in bed, read a book, and we've got a light here, of course, to facilitate that. Same on both sides, and plenty of breadth too, so you and a partner can do the same. The windows, as in the porthole, are excellent, very deep, so we can see out to the side, we can see aft, and the natural light is also very good. And we've got some well-arranged and very generous, actually, shelving along here to the port side. And as you see here, the fact that this entire starboard hull has no permanent transverse bulkheads really ramps up that sense of freedom, of brightness, of openness. It's very satisfying indeed. And it probably needs to be, because the wood trim you see here, well, if you find it a little bit dark, you're going to be a bit stuck, because this is the only option there is. And if I turn myself around, well, we also have space for a dressing table. Sliding door again here. Good storage spaces, both to port and to starboard. We've got some really big storage spaces in here. Lots of hanging storage in there. And then instead of a bedroom forward, we have a massive walk-in shower. Again, kind of a wet room configuration, but the length of it is quite something. With a toilet at the aft end, a bit more storage here, sink in the centre, semi-partition, and then all kinds of space up here. Again, with a really lovely long window and good natural ventilation for a couple of people to share together in the morning if you want to. Once again though, in spite of the fact it's a shower room, we still have access to a massive compartment here. No bow thruster on the starboard side, so it's a solid floor, but it's a tremendous size that, I have to say. It's really take up the brunt for all your bulky baggage that you don't want to get in the way if you're cruising long term. This then is a very good boat, but as with all boats that commit so wholeheartedly to a particular design ethos, there are going to be some people who like it and some who don't. Now, I know it might sound blindingly self-evident, but if you don't really buy into these design solutions that Leopard's come up with, then you're definitely going to need to look elsewhere. But if you do, then this is absolutely a boat you need to see.